Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Welcome to today's ICP webinar. We are very excited about today's presentation on a 20-year follow-up with Mayan teens who were asked about their hopes for the future. I am Mary Bullock. I am a board member of the ICP. Our speaker today is Judith Gibbons, and our moderator is Nancy Seiden, also a board member of the ICP. For those of you who do not know, the International Council of Psychologists, the host for today's webinar, is an organization of mostly psychologists with a focus on exploring psychology and human rights, dignity, and justice. In addition to publishing a newsletter and hosting a number of interest groups where members can explore topics on health, decolonization, climate justice, and the like, ICP hosts an annual scientific meeting. This year's is December 1 and 2 on Zoom, and the theme is Human Rights, Dignity, and Justice, Empowerment for All. Please check out the ICP 2023 web pages. Please think about submitting your own work. The websites are on your screen. Membership in ICP is open to all. You can find out more on the ICP website. And for those of you who are not yet members, please be sure to note the special Discover ICP membership initiative. You can join now for the rest of 2023 and 2024 with a waived membership fee. So before we begin today's webinar, there are just a couple of housekeeping comments. First, please ask questions in the QA function on your webinar or via the chat. We'll try to get to all of them during the discussion. And secondly, we will automatically send attendance certificates to all of you who are with us for at least 40 minutes. We send the certificates to the names and emails that we see on the screen. So if you're using someone else's computer or have a different email, please send a separate note to us indicating how you're watching, and I'll put the email to send it to in the chat box. So now I'd like to turn over the meeting to Dr. Nancy Seiden, who will introduce today's speaker.
I'm very happy to be here to be able to do this. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Judith Gibbons, the 2022 International Council of Psychologists Fukuhara Awardee. This award is given for distinguished contributions to international psychology and research and service. I'd like to share a little bit about Judy, and Judy, I hope you're comfortable with me calling you Judy versus Dr. Gibbons. And once I do share this with you, I think you will definitely see why she's the most deserving of this award. Judy's contributions to the publishing of international psychology research is extraordinary. She was the founding editor of the International Perspectives in Psychology, Research Practice and Consultation, which is APA Division's 52 International Psychology Journal. She served on numerous editorial boards of journals that have focused on contributions from Costa Rica, Peru, the Caribbean, and Latin American researchers. She was the co-editor of the APA book series on Latin American psychology and former associate editor of the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology. The editorial roles mentioned only captures a fraction of the impressive contributions in making sure globally focused research is published. Perhaps what really sets Judy apart from other international researchers is her strong commitment and investment in fostering the development of researchers from underrepresented parts of the world, especially Latin America. She has served as the president of the Inter-American Society of Psychology, known by its initials in Spanish as SIP, and the Society for Cross-Cultural Research. She was a Fulbright scholar at the Universidad del Valle de Guatemalan. I'm sure I butchered that horribly, sorry. Her research area of focus are on international and cross-cultural studies of adolescent development, inter-country adoption, and the psychology of women and gender. Judy has published 5 books, 91 original peer-reviewed research articles, and 104 book chapters, book reviews, and editorials. Her research reflects the expansiveness of the globe lens she adopts and informs her work. Some recent publications include her book, co-authored by E.K. Poulter, Technology and the Global Adolescent, and most recently, a manuscript that we co-authored for the International Journal of Psychology special issue on human rights entitled Women, Girls, and Climate Change. human rights, vulnerabilities, and opportunities. These are a glimpse into her distinguished contributions to international psychology. She has shared her research broadly with over 234 presentations at professional conferences throughout the world. Lastly, Judy has had a distinguished career in academics. She is Professor Emerita of Psychology at St. Louis University and was a Fulbright Scholar at the Universidad del Valle de Guatemala. She has influenced multiple psychology scholars through her work as a professor and directed numerous outstanding dissertations that further international psychology research. She resides in Antigua, Guatemala, with her husband, 2 dogs, and 2 horses. And while living in Guatemala, she has applied her psychological knowledge in assisting a number of NGOs, particularly NGOs related to education and girls' empowerment. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Judy Gibbons to you all.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Very, very humbling to hear you say these things. And I have to say, of course, it's been a great pleasure to work with you over the years. I guess I should start, eh? So there were options about what I was to talk about today, and ICP asked for this particular perspective, but I'm happy they chose it because, in fact, it's my favorite study of all time, and it was started over 20 years ago. The title for this presentation is Maya Teens 20 Years Later, Unrealized Dreams and Creative Refitting. And I had a co-author for this study, Brian Ashdown, and he is now at Albizu University. And he is a fantastic collaborator on the study because he spent 2 years in Guatemala many years ago, even before he went to graduate school. So I have the pleasure of working with him again on this particular project. I also want to mention the award that I received from ICP was named in honor of Machiko Fukuhara. And I always want to give credit and honor the person who the award was named for. She's a Japanese academic. I've never met her in person, but it's clear that she has contributed very generously to national and international organizations, including as the president of ICP. So I want to acknowledge her too in this presentation. This study is based on a particular theory, which is called life course theory. That is, what are the social pathways of human lives? How do historical and situational factors influence the course of people's lives? So we'll see these individuals who were teenagers in about the year 2000 and now are in their 30s. How did their life turn out? And that was our basic question. What were the factors, the historical factors, the contextual factors that influenced their lives? The study is also greatly influenced by ecological theory, by a Bronfenbrenner approach, because we're really interested in what are those microsystems, ecosystems, and macrosystems that are influential in people's lives. First, I have to talk a bit about the Guatemalan context. Guatemala is a Central American country of about 17 million people, although the census isn't certain, but it's approximately 17 million. It is the youngest country of Latin America. Half of Guatemalans are under the age of 25. That makes the issues that are related to youth very critical for the country itself. Guatemala is mostly Christian, mostly Catholic and evangelical Christianity, and over 80% of the individuals claim a religious affiliation. Guatemala is ethnically diverse, and this is one of the critical things about Guatemala. About 40% of Guatemalans identify as indigenous Mayan. About 55% are Ladino. That's a mixed heritage of people of indigenous and European descent. And there are another few people who are purely European descent or from the indigenous groups such as Xinca. There is a long history of internal armed conflict that I'm sure you all have heard about. From 1960 to 1996, there were enormous conflicts throughout the country in which many people, and the numbers are still disputed, were killed or disappeared. The majority of those, about 85%, were of indigenous, from the indigenous population. So one of the questions that people always ask me is, what are the consequences? Are there intergenerational consequences of the war? The other thing that's notable about Guatemala is the economic disparity. It has a Gini ratio. I'm sure you're all familiar with Gini ratios, but 48.3. That's extremely high. It's one of the highest in the Americas. Sometimes Haiti surpasses Guatemala in economic disparity, but in some years, Guatemala is the highest in economic disparity. That means that the wealthiest part of the population has the great majority of the wealth. Here in Guatemala, the indigenous are particularly disadvantaged in education, in income, and in health. Overall, throughout the country, there are relatively low levels of educational attainment. About 83% of people finish primary school, 37% finish secondary school, and fewer than 5% have a licenciatura. Now, a licenciatura is equivalent to a bachelor's degree with about a year of practical training. So it's a little more than a bachelor's degree, but not quite as advanced as a master's degree. Of the over 20 indigenous languages of Guatemala, the largest group are Quiche speaking. There are about 1,700,000 Quiche speakers. So I'm going to be talking about a Quiche village, so I wanted to show you the map. The sort of turquoise color, I can't point because you can't see me point, but the turquoise color sort of in the middle of the map is the Quiche speaking region. It's in the Western Highlands. It's actually fairly cool in this part of the country. And like I said, there are many, many Quiche speakers in the country. Quiche region is mostly made up of the Departamento de Chichicastenango, or state of Chichicastenango. The state of Chichicastenango has a municipal center. The municipal center is just called Chichicastenango. It's a city of Chichicastenango. And there is a very famous market and a church that many tourists visit. These beautiful photos were taken by Kirsten Sabine, and she generously lent them to me for this presentation. But I think they show the richness and the beauty of the culture here in Guatemala, and specifically in Chichicastenango. Chichicastenango is made up of 87 cantones. We could also call them villages or aldeas, or there are other kinds of names that could be used to describe the different villages that make up the state of Chichicastenango. And it is one of those where I did this research. In 1999, I was invited, along with my husband, to the inauguration of a new highway. And this is a picture of the highway. You can see it's basically two cement paths that connected a village, one of the cantons of Chichicastenango, with the major highway. And before that, it had been a sort of muddy trail that people had to walk. And this was a big change for the village, because now vehicles could pass fairly readily back and forth to the major highway. The distance is about 2 kilometers, but it's up and down very steep hills. And so this was a major achievement for the village. They did this themselves. The workers, the people, the men from the village came out and built it themselves with contributions from various individuals. The couple I have there, the Miguel, is the person who invited me to the inauguration of the new highway, and it was a big celebration. And it was the beginning of a very long relationship with the community. From 2000 to 2003, I did we call it Photo Voice now, but it actually hadn't been named in the year 2000 as Photo Voice. It was a study among 87 adolescents who were in the primary school in the community. The community only had a primary school, and to this day, there is no education in the village beyond the 6th grade level. So I went to the village with disposable cameras and invited various adolescents to participate. Oh, what I wanted to say was that you would think that we wouldn't find very many adolescents in primary school, but in fact, there were many. There were individuals up to 17 years old that were in 6th grade, for example. So there wasn't necessarily a close connection between age and grade, as in schools, for example, in the US. We were younger then. This is me arriving at the school. So what was the procedure? We gave each participant a disposable camera, and the instructions were: take 10 photographs of your present life, answering 5 questions on a questionnaire about each photograph. Who took the photo? What is the photo of? Where was the photo taken? What aspect of your life does the photo show? And how do you feel about this? Then take 10 pictures of your future life, answering 5 questions. Who took the photo? Where was the photo taken? What aspect of your life does the photo show? How do you feel about this? How old will you be when this happens? And the remaining pictures, there were 27 on a roll, take those of anything you want, that you want a picture of, that you want a photo of. So then I sat down with each participant and just matched the questionnaires, because they weren't necessarily in order, matched the questionnaires with the photographs, and they all received copies of every photograph. In 2022, with the help of 2 research assistants from the village, this is a couple, their names are Lydia Tomin and Fernando Tomin, and with Brian's help, we were able to find and interview 26 of the original participants. So it's amazing, because it is a relatively small village, that people know each other, and it was not easy, but it was possible to find them again. This is our research team, including my husband Raymond, who was our driver, as well as Brian Ashdown, Lydia Tomin, and Fernando Tomin. We needed a driver, by the way, because even though there are roads now, they're up and down little hills, and it was quite tricky terrain. This is a picture of the community. This is today, where there are a lot more houses than there were in the year 2000. The total population is about 2,400. It's mostly agricultural economy. They raise apples, corn, plums, and some other crops as well. There are a lot of merchants, however, especially handicraft vendors, and they go to the local markets and they sell handicrafts from Guatemala. That's how we originally met Miguel Tomin. Okay, the 26 participants in 2022 included 14 women, 12 men. For all of them, the first language was Quiche. Most of them had pretty fluent Spanish. A few even had a few words of English. But when we got stuck, we always had one of our research assistants with us who could translate between Spanish and Quiche. For their religion, 2 were Catholic, 22 were evangelical, and 2 reported no religion. This is really interesting because it's higher evangelical, higher percentage than for the whole country, but there are actually 6 evangelical churches in this relatively small town. So it's clearly a religious community. Of marital status, 21 were married, 5 were single. Their typical age when they did the Photo Voice project was about 13 years old. They were from age 11 to say age 16. And their grade in school at Photo Voice was about fifth grade, but there was a great range from 3rd to 6th grade. At the interview, their average age was 33 years old, but they were ranged from 30 to 38. So really, they're in middle adulthood by the time we interviewed them. The highest grade completed average 6.7, but there was one extreme outlier. There was a woman with a master's degree. So most of them hadn't gone beyond 6th grade, but there was one very highly educated person. The number of children ranged from 0 to 5, and the average was 2.5. Now, I found this extremely interesting because my research assistants pointed out to me, even though the participants didn't bring it up, that one of the big changes in the community is that family planning has been introduced into the community. The average number of children for Guatemalans in the year 2000 was about 4. And now the average number of children is 2.4. So basically, the birth rate has decreased dramatically, which I think has really is one of the factors that has affected the community and the whole country, actually. Okay, now these individuals, they couldn't really report on the money that they earned because, first of all, they don't consistently earn a salary. They sometimes they sell their crops, and so one month might be very high income, another month nothing. The other thing is when we ask adolescents this question, they have absolutely no idea what the income of their family is. So in general, in these kinds of studies, we've been using household amenities as an indicator of wealth or their economic status. And so if you look, this is in the current study in 2022. Of the 26 participants, 24 had electricity in their house. They call it loose. We have electricity in our house. A high percentage of them also had cell phones. That was 22 out of the 26 had cell phones. Cell phones are really prevalent in Guatemala. In fact, there are many more cell phones than the population. There are more cell phones than people in the country. Television was also very popular. 18 of the 26 had television. About 65% had their own house. Others were renting or they were living with family members, etc. 61% had a stove. 50% had a refrigerator. Motorcycles also, of course, proliferated during the pandemic. This was a country where all public transportation was shut down. So people bought motorcycles so that they could get around. And so motorcycles are very prevalent in the country too. Only 4 out of the 26 has a bookcase in the house. And this is the one thing we ask often in our studies because it's an indicator of the importance, I think, of education for the family. And it's always disheartening to me to see a relatively few have bookcases. A phone in the house, that's very rare here. Hot water is also very rare, even though it's quite cold in this village. People bathe in cold water. A few had a microwave. One person had a car. One person had a computer. And none, of course, had clothes washers or clothes dryers. So this is just a snapshot of the conditions under which individuals were living. This is a picture of an adobe house. There are relatively few adobe houses now. Most houses are of concrete block. So this is another big change in the community. I'm going to focus because I think storytelling is such a powerful way to convey information. I want to focus on 2 participants and tell their stories. And then I will give you a little bit of the overall themes that came out for all the participants. First, let's talk about Anna. For one thing, I want to say these are all pseudonyms. I asked them to pick a pseudonym, so they got to pick this. This woman picked the pseudonym of Anna. Some were very creative. They became Tigre, which is tiger, or Leon, which is lion. But this individual picked Anna as her pseudonym. As a 12-year-old in 5th grade in the year 2000, she photographed and wrote about nature. Nature was really important to her, as to actually many of the participants. She said, we should not cut down the trees so that there should be more life. She focused on the daily tasks of women. She took many pictures of women doing their tasks, and she said, we have to wash the clothes every day. She talked about church. It's good to go to church. School, it's good to have a school. And the road. For me, the road is very important. Remember, the road, the new road had just been built when she did this task. In her future photos, she focused on school and personal growth. She said, well, when I'm 14, she was only 12, remember, when I'm 14, I have to study. I feel happy that when I'm 17, I have to study more. I feel happy because my teacher teaches me to read and write. When I am older, I will have to work like the teachers. When I am older, I have to respect people and the patriotic symbols of Guatemala. One of the things over the years I've learned being here in Guatemala is that respect is really important. It's inculcated in children. It's a regular part of the culture. And in fact, it shows up in the language. That is, in many countries, for example, I was in Spain for a while, everybody uses the informal form of you, which is tú. In Guatemala, it's rarely used. I've met people who even use usted, the formal form, with their children. Usually tú is reserved for people you know very well or for your pets. Okay, Anna, what happened to Anna? Well, what did she describe had been her life? She had dropped out of school at the end of 5th grade and was now living in an urban area where her family has a small store. She had enjoyed taking the photos. In the village, her family cultivated these various crops, but now they only grow corn. One unrealized dream was that she wanted to have a car. The most significant event in her life was the move to an urban area where she has more freedom. She noted that there's a water scarcity in the village. This is one of the recurring things that they talked about. There's a lack of water in the village. Actually, in large parts of Guatemala are suffering this shortage, and it isn't for an overall lack of water, but really poor distribution. It's unequally distributed. She complains that the village has lots of fresh air, but your clothes get too dirty and you have to wash them and you can't. The stream where she had played no longer exists. She said her life had not turned out exactly as she had wished, but more or less. The main thing she regrets is her lack of education. I wanted to continue studying. Although she has no children, she would have wanted her children to be educated and to earn a degree. Now, this is a picture of a little kind of tienda, like what her family owns in the urban area. The little tienda is a little store. Okay, the second one I want to talk about is Antonio. He was also in the 5th grade as a 14-year-old in the year 2000, and he wrote about various parts of his life. School, well, school is to study. Cornfields, well, their purpose is to provide corn. Apple orchards, they're good for our environment. And the plot of land, it's good for growing something. You can see that he's very purpose-oriented, that everything in his life has a purpose, and we'll see that come up later. Antonio revealed that he didn't finish 5th grade, but he dropped out of school. He had some kind of attack, which he couldn't really describe, but the doctors told him, you'll never be able to think again, or you can't go on in school. He said, well, I wanted to study and I even had a scholarship, but they told me that with that illness, I would not be able to. So he also moved to an urban area and started to work. I stayed in my room and lost my future to be a teacher and help children. He's now married with 2 children, and unlike most of the participants, has a bookcase with books in his house. Illness had affected other members of his family too, including his mother, who could no longer weave, and an uncle who had previously done construction. Having accepted Jesus, he converted while he was sick. Antonio now works with youth in a church group. He said, you don't need to study when you have your heart to help others. It is also difficult for me because if I had studied, I would be better prepared to work with the youth. Because today I can't use a computer. I can make a plan, but my other friend has to do the computer work. So it is very sad. So this is where I noticed that there were unrealized dreams among many of the participants. There are other examples too, but these are two poignant ones, I think, of individuals, youth, who had very really optimistic plans for their future, but were unable to realize them. What did we do with these interviews? Transcribed them, printed them out, and we're applying reflexive thematic analysis, which is a Braun and Clark procedure, using the Atlas TI software. Now, if those of you who do qualitative research, if you haven't seen this book, I highly recommend it. It's a 2022 book, and it's really fabulous. It's a nice guideline for how to do this kind of work. So these are the themes that we've identified so far that we found in the data. The number one was, yo quería estudiar más. I wanted to study more. That is a major theme that came out, very powerful and poignant. Their biggest regret was truncated education. And that's despite its poor quality. That is, I would attend some classes in the schools back in the year 2000 or so. And it was mostly rote learning. The teacher would say the alphabet, for example, or 4 letters of the alphabet, and the kids would repeat after her. Or it would be sort of call and response. She would say, what's the capital of this departamento of Guatemala? And they'd have to say the answer. Very, very, I think, not consistent with most of the educational practices that we implement today. And so this was a really common theme. I wanted to study more. Both Ana and Antonio said that. I wanted to consider studying, but my dad didn't have the money to give me for more education. And Josefa said, that ended my dream. In Spanish, it's even more powerful. Se terminó mi sueño. It like ended. I wanted to keep studying, but I couldn't because of the cost. I didn't reach that dream I had, and that was Rosa. Okay, another prominent theme was we have to take care of nature. Protecting nature and the environment was extremely common in the original pictures, the photographs of the teenagers, and when the adults look back on this. If you look at the picture on the left, I don't know what you would think it was of, but I would have thought it was actually those two people in the middle, and that the teenager had been a poor photographer. In fact, they had never used a camera before, none of them. And so their pictures were not exactly well-designed, professional quality, et cetera. They would put their finger over it, et cetera. There were lots of mistakes in the pictures. So I assumed that that was a picture of two people, but they weren't close enough to really get them in the frame. And Rosa informed me that that isn't the case. This was a picture of the pine trees that are here. They're no longer here because they've been cut down. So first of all, she was lamenting the change that people were cutting down trees. But also, I think if you remember that the Nisbet work on cognition and how some cultures pay attention more to the background, others to the focus. And of course, I was born and raised in the United States, and I probably take an analytic approach, which is I assume that the picture was of the people. But Rosa informed me that I was incorrect. In fact, the picture was of the background, pine trees. So I think we need to look at those kinds of really subtle things in the pictures that they took. Here's our other picture. We used to play here, but now you suffer going to the river. You go to wash clothes or to fetch water, and sometimes there is just none. So again, lamenting nature and its loss, its destruction. The other thing that was very prevalent was change in gender roles. Hoy en día hay más oportunidades para las mujeres. Today, in today's world, there are more opportunities for women. There have been changes in gender roles. I'm not sure they're quite as profound as some of the participants said. Rosa said, well, my mother used to clean the house all day, and evidently she does not completely. Excuse me. We now, Leon, this is a boy or man, we have almost the same rights now. Adolfo said, because there was a lot of machismo in which the man said, I order it and you have to do it. Now the woman and the man are equal. And Cesar said, there was a lot of machismo when the man demanded what he wanted, but now I don't see that. I think the men are a little more optimistic about this egalitarianism than the women. The women didn't quite frame it quite so directly that we have exactly the same rights as now, but they did note that there were changes in gender roles. The women more said that now girls have the right to go to school, and for them that was important. They also spoke about migration. Almost every family was affected in some way by migration, mostly to the United States, but also to Canada. And migration was described as a double-edged sword, as really having some really good aspects and really bad aspects as well. I titled this Se olvidan de sus familias. In other words, they forget their families. And this is the case, not with everyone, of course, but some men who leave, they forget that they have families back in Guatemala, and they go on, sometimes they have new families, form new families in the United States. Some of the pictures, of course, of migration are unrealistic, but here was one person that said something very realistic. It is pure work. You work from Monday to Saturday and maybe Sunday. You get home late, tired, and you have to prepare your food, wash your clothes. So basically, it's a lot of work. Here's the good side. Rosa said, well, I feel very happy with my brother who went to the US because truthfully, he helped us a great deal. My mom, she is sick, but to go to the doctor costs a lot of money. And thanks be to God that my brother who is there is helping us. So they were able to take care of things like both education and health through the remesas or remittances that they received from the States. My friends went to the US, Adolfo said, and now they have a little house or a better life for their family. Many of the participants remarked on the change in the community, that is their houses, and they would exclaim, they have 2 stories or even 3 stories. That is, used to be everybody had this small little 1-story home. And Leon pointed out another of the adverse consequences. The children stay behind, so they grow up without their dads. I am going to try to rush through this because I want to leave lots of time for questions, but let me just say a couple more things. This was the influence of technology, which was also a mixed blessing. They said people can communicate more rapidly. For example, if somebody's family is sick, you can just call people. But this was a really strongly held opinion by one participant, because infancy and childhood is just not the same now. Before we played, here's where we played ball. In contrast, now they only have cell phones. Before we were happy playing, but not now. And here you see a little girl who's only 4 years old using, looks like her mother's cell phone. What do they want for the future? They want their children to have more education and economic security than they had. I want the best for my children. And so those are the 2 themes that they wanted, 2 things: that they have a better education and that they leave better prepared than I was, that they have some economic security, like a little plot of land, a little house, and a good life with their family. Okay, so what are the social and historical conditions that affected the course of their lives? The main one, of course, is difficult access to quality education and healthcare. And the second, I think, is they found new ways to communicate with the outside world: the road, cell phones, migration. So those are, I think, the 2 prominent social conditions that have really influenced the trajectory of their lives. What I was most impressed about from interviewing all these individuals and talking with them and going over their transcripts is the resilience and adaptation. In the face of really severe challenges, they did find ways to achieve, in part, their goals. Ana, she moved to a more urban region where she had more freedom. Antonio, he couldn't be a teacher because he had dropped out of school, but he worked with a youth group instead, and he found great satisfaction in doing that. Leon was a participant who decided he had dropped out of school, so he went back to middle school at the age of 19. He said it was a bit embarrassing. He was the oldest person in school, but it helped him achieve his goals. Here are my lessons learned. First of all, you have to recruit great collaborators and research assistants. And I want to do a shout out to Brian Ashdown, who is my collaborator. And he has this great sense of humor that helps him get along with everybody in the world. And then my two research assistants, who are just fabulous individuals who speak Quiche in Spanish and even a couple words of English. And we've had a great relationship. The second lesson learned was maintaining the relationship with the community with mutual respect and kindness. I have 3 examples of things we did for the community. The Spanish Club at St. Lucie one year bought them a water tank for the school. I was Googling the name of the village once and found online a proposal by the health department of the country to found a clinic there, a little health clinic. And I said, well, you don't have a clinic, right? And so they said, no. I said, well, wonder why this wasn't implemented. So I printed out the proposal, took it to the organizing committee of the community, and they went to the Ministry of Health. And a few months ago, they broke ground for a clinic. Evidently, the Department of Health had somehow forgotten it. I don't know what happened exactly, but now they're going to have a clinic. And the second thing is, this was in about the year 2000, where Raymond, my husband, took a photograph of all the kids in the school, and it's still up. They brought it to show to us last time we were there. They brought it to show to us because it's still in the director's office of the school. So it's just been a very rewarding experience, I think, for me. I know for me, but probably for them. I hope for them too. So I have to thank everyone. Thank you in several languages. Thank you. Gracias, Maltios, Dios Chawe. And thank you to everyone, particularly the participants, but also to Lydia, Fernanda, Nancy. To Nancy, thank you for nominating me for this award. To Mary for organizing this webinar. To Kirsten, who provided these beautiful photos, and to many, many graduate students over the years. And this is one thing that a participant said to me, and I just wanted to reiterate it because it shows again the importance of relationship. When I was a child, really, and you came to the school, and well, it gave me a lot of pleasure that you returned to visit us. And well, thanks be to God that you are well, that you are in good health. That is, many people do research in Guatemala or other parts of the world, developing world, majority world, and they call it helicopter research or safari research or something like that. They jump in, they collect their data, and they leave. And that is so contrary to my ethical principles. And I've been really blessed and lucky to be able to maintain this long-term relationship with this community. And that is me and Brian, if you would like to contact us. And we have time for questions. I'm going to stop sharing.
There are some questions in the question and answer part. So let me just start. The first one is, were the girls less likely to realize their dreams? And what about the outlier who has a master's? What did you say in 2000?
Great questions. We haven't specifically analyzed for gender differences, but my sense is that just as many of the men were unable to realize their dreams too. One case of one individual that I haven't mentioned so far, he really wanted to have a business, and instead he's doing farming, much as his father and grandfather did, growing just small amounts of crops on a small plot of land. And he was very disappointed. So you see, and of course, Antonio, that I did talk about, Antonio, he was unable to realize his dream of being a teacher. So my sense is that it's not gender specific, the non-realization of dreams. And of course, I attribute the major factor to that of being unable to access education. Again, it wasn't fabulous education, but it was education, and they really had the dream to finish, to continue.
And a couple of the participants mentioned cost of education. So was there a fee for them to go to school?
No, education was technically free, but they had to provide their own school supplies, útiles escolares or school supplies. They had to, of course, take time out from chores they could be doing at home. Girls have told me in the past that they had to drop out because their mother really needed them at home. And the boys said the same, their fathers needed them in the fields. So that was, I think, one of the major reasons. They say about the cost, but really they mean the economic impact on the family. The outlier, I love to talk about her. She was astounding. She, her goal in life was to teach illiterate women, adult women, to read. That was her goal. And she had for a while had a job with an NGO to do that. And that job had ended, like many NGOs, they left or their project ended. And that was her goal. She wanted to go back and find a way to teach literacy to women who were illiterate. So, okay, more?
Yes. Did you come across any resistance or difficulties with obtaining an IRB ethics approval back then?
Okay, back then it's really, that was the very beginning of the IRB. And they, with the permission of the community and the teachers, they did not require me to get parents' permission. They allowed the parents or the children to not participate, but lots has changed in the last 20, 25 years with IRBs. Then, of course, this time they were adults already. So informed consent was required. We had a written consent form and they signed it. So it was, we had the informed consent of the participants.
Would there be any constraints in obtaining approval in current times?
I don't think so. I think it would be a little bit tricky because we'd have to get the consent of the parents, of course, and a lot of the parents are illiterate. So I think we would have to get consent at some event in the community and ask the parents at that community for their consent. And a lot the people who are illiterate in Guatemala, they often their signature is their thumbprint. So we'd have to take a pad and they'd have to put their thumbprint on the consent form. I think it's still possible. The IRB I work with is very, very difficult and has not been understanding about working in the majority world. But usually I've been able to work it out. For example, I wanted to recruit participants for this study by putting up a little poster in the community, say, if you were part of the camera study back then, call this phone number. They didn't permit that. They thought it was too coercive or something. I'm not sure why, but that was not permitted.
Interesting. Okay. Another question is, what is the percentage of the people of African descent?
Well, in this community, none. They're all indigenous Mayan. In the whole of Guatemala, I think it's 1 or 2%. The Garifuna is an Afro-Caribbean group that live in a small part of Guatemala on the eastern coast, on the east coast of Guatemala. But it's a very small percentage, 1 or 2%. But of course, skin color varies dramatically, of course, within the country.
I think this next question kind of relates to what you just said. Decades ago, the person that asked the question recalls coming across information that provided details that part of Guatemala was also on the Caribbean side. Since you didn't mention that, has there been rezoning of the country?
What you mean by rezoning, but it's still the Garifuna community is very, they still exist. They still practice their traditions. There's a wonderful museum. I once could say thank you in their language, but I can't remember it. I'm sorry. But it's relatively small compared to the population of Guatemala. It's less than 2% of the population.
Okay. You had mentioned in your presentation about the intergenerational trauma. Is there anything you'd like to say about that? with with the study?
Well, that it's really difficult to ascertain. When I ask people directly, because I have a lot of friends now in the community, I say, do you know that that your great uncle actually was massacred in a massacre in the village? And I ran into one member of the community the other day, and he's in his 30s, and he said, no, I had no idea. I said, well, I know because your father told me once, but, and so there's no, I said, did he ever tell you? Did he ever talk about it? And he said, absolutely not. So I think it's evident in very subtle ways. For example, I think there's a lot of worry about security in the community, and they sort of have their own patrols at night. And that's why Anna, for example, doesn't want to live in the community. She says she has no freedom. She can't like go out at night because everybody will wonder what she's doing out there. So I think that's one of the consequences, but it's not what we usually talk about when we talk about intergenerational trauma. It's more subtle things that are different, that might have been different had there not been this civil war in the countryside.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That is the end of the formal questions that people have put in for the question and answer section. We have literally probably 3 minutes left. If there's anybody else has a quick question you'd like to ask Dr. Gibbons. If not, I'd like to thank you for a very inspirational talk, and really appreciate you being with us today. I do see Mary is putting up our next webinar, announcing that.
Yes.
Okay.
So let me also thank you so much for an incredibly informative webinar. This has really been interesting. And I just want to say this webinar will be, the recording will be posted on the ICP website in a couple of days. And our next webinar will be September 26th, where Dr. Nora Sveas and Pau Perez will talk about torture and the role of the psychology profession. And with that,
with that, we're signing off.
I think we would all like to say, hope you enjoyed the webinar. Please join us for the next one, and have a great rest of your day, evening, or night.
Okay. Thank you. Bye now.